Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of Taboo Table Talk. This is going to be a little bit of a different episode. It's going to be a little ranty. It's going to be me getting some shit off my chest. But before we do that, I just want to remind you guys that there is a virtual comedy show happening tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. If you are available and you would like to check out some new material from yours truly, then please do go to my website and snag tickets to that virtual show. Once you grab tickets, I will then, an hour before the show, send out an email with the link for this evening's show via Zoom. Again, you can go to my website at krishmohanhaha.com, KRISHMOHANHAHA.com. Yeah, that's tonight, 8 p.m. And then I'll be doing other ones as well. I think the next one's going to be in May, because in April I am going to be on tour for 10 days with the one and only Ron Placone, Big Ronnie Pease from Get Your News On with Ron. Old Ronnie Placone and I. Ron actually got me started in started in touring. He was the first comic that got me on the road. Gave me some contact, gave me some pointers, and helped me out. So I'm very excited to be on the road with him April 16th through the 25th. And we're going to be in Pittsburgh. We are going to be in Toronto. We are going to be in Ottawa, Montreal, Burlington, Portland, Maine, Boston, and New York City. So if you live in those cities, you can get your tickets over at ronplacone.com or over at krishmohanhaha.com, KRISHMOHANHAHA.com. If you enjoy the content that I produce, consider making a one-time donation or becoming a sustaining member, making monthly contributions, also available directly on my website. You can also check out my stand-up comedy albums that are available. And the last thing I will say before we dive into getting some shit off my chest is go check out radindiemedia.com. I've mentioned this site before on a few road reflections and perhaps on some Forkful of Noodles. If I haven't, I should mention it on Forkful of Noodles as well as this podcast. And Rad Indie Media is basically a lefty news aggregator that has stories and covers topics that you won't hear on corporate media such as CNN, BBC, NPR, Fox News. Most of these stories that you'll see on Rad Indie Media are not covered or touched by those outlets. So go check them out. Go support them if you could. Okay, so if you saw the title of this podcast, you know that we're going to be talking about what the fuck happened in Ukraine. And I will preface it with these statements. One, I do not support the invasion of Ukraine. Two, I do not support NATO in any way, shape, or form. Three, I am against all forms of imperialism, whether they be U.S., Russian, or any other nation. If you are an imperialist, I completely disagree with your life philosophy and your need to exist. I think imperialism has never been and never will be a force of good, regardless of what country or what philosophy or economic platform it follows. Imperialism is awful and causes death and destruction wherever it is seen. So remember, I am against the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Not a fan of Putin, not a fan of NATO. Don't agree with NATO. Don't think NATO should exist. And keep those statements in the back of your mind, because we are going to address quite a bit of things, quite a few issues that I think this current crisis we are in has revealed about just the human condition, because I would say just the American condition, but I don't have enough evidence to say that what I'm about to talk about is localized only to the American disposition. So bear that in mind, please. So here's the situation. As I understand it, I have paid attention to the coverage from corporate media as well as coverage from a lot of independent sources that are getting their information from on the ground and have been paying attention to this far longer than I have. And so I'm learning from the people that have learned this information rather firsthand. So that's where I'm getting my shit from. Why, Mike? Why overqualify this situation, Krish? Well, because we, as the podcast coming up in the next few weeks are going to talk about, we have a major problem with trust in the media and how much our bias actually affects that trust. Right? If it's information that we particularly don't like, we're very willing to dismiss that information and come up with various reasons for why we can't accept the truth that is being conveyed by that information. So I'm saying this as another disclaimer, in saying if you don't like some of the shit that I'm saying, well, too bad, because it's the truth. And it's the truth based on facts that I've learned, not truths based on I feels. I just want to make that very clear. First and foremost, let's address what NATO is, because I think that's one thing that I have. One, not a lot of people in corporate media seem to be talking about NATO or the NATO perspective, and how NATO is really just an extension of U.S. imperialism. Um, NATO was created after World War II, and you can make the argument, if we lived in an ideal world, that NATO is an alliance of countries to ensure something like the Nazis don't rise up again. You guys remember the Nazis, the most evil people that have ever lived on the face of the earth, asterisk, depending on who you talk to. And whenever we need to demonize communism and socialism, um, this was, in theory, that's what it was formed for. It was formed so that no global dictatorial force can ever take over. Well, that is in theory, but what in reality NATO is a military alliance of European countries under the behest of capitalist America to ensure that we bring Russia to heel. That's what NATO was built for, and that's what NATO continues to act as. It is a military alliance. It is not an alliance built on peaceful ideologies, built on niceties, or any of that sort of stuff. It is an aggressive military alliance. Militaries are built for one thing: war. So, what do you think a military alliance is built for? Do you think it's built for war purposes? This is like when people are like, well, we got to send the military over for humanitarian efforts. No, 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 no. You send humanitarians over for humanitarian efforts. You send the military over for an invasion, to engage in warfare. And by the way, America, as much as it likes to claim that they're the bastion of freedom, uses the military and has used the military in several instances against the American people in and of itself. Kent State comes to mind. The labor movement of the early 1900s comes to mind. Even before that, the military did $80 million worth of damage during the Pullman strike in Chicago. That also comes to mind. So, NATO, military alliance specifically built to make sure that Russia comes to heel, that Russia will bend to the whims of American capitalism, And they wanted to ensure that they had some kind of resistance to the socialist bloc that was starting to develop in the second half of the 20th century. Now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was an agreement that was made, I believe in 1991, that NATO was not going to expand eastward past Germany. Well, that agreement has been violated countless times over. There are a lot of former USSR countries like Lithuania, Estonia, um, possibly also the Czech Republic. I can't remember, and I don't have them. I'm not staring at the map in front of me right now. Turkey, I know, is part of that as well. Part of NATO as well. These are all countries that are eastward of Germany, which is something that NATO said that it would not do. Um, and Russia, many times over since 1991, has said, hey, Ukraine is the red line. Uh, we are not going to be okay with Ukraine joining NATO because then NATO is directly at the borders of Russia. And again, NATO is a military alliance. That means aggression. So, as far as Russia sees this, any sort of NATO expansion, being that NATO is a military alliance, I'm gonna keep saying it so it sticks in. They're a military alliance. They will look at Ukraine joining NATO or being pressured to join NATO as military aggression. That puts NATO troops at the borders of Russia. This is not what they wanted. Again, NATO formed to bring socialist Russia to heel. Now, is Russia currently socialist? They are not. They are very much a capitalist country. In fact, Vladimir Putin does not like communism or socialism. They are trying to build a pipeline. So all of this stuff is coming into play. We'll kind of get into some of the weeds of that in just a few minutes here. So NATO has violated this agreement that they made with Russia in saying, "Hey, we are not going to move eastward past Germany." They didn't give a shit. So they look at it as military aggression. Georgia, the nation of Georgia, was another red line that they said, "Hey, we're not okay with the nation of Georgia joining NATO because that brings NATO troops directly to the border of Russia. We're going to look at that as military aggression, considering you are a military alliance of nations, so on and so forth." So many times, Russia has basically said, these are our red lines, these are our boundaries. And I'm going to use a personal anecdote here, right? Is in the past, have had quite a bit of trouble articulating my own personal boundaries in many instances. And guess what? It led to some pretty bad situations, right? So I am for articulating what your boundaries are. I am for saying, hey, this is what I'm not okay with. And if you do this, there are going to be consequences to be had. So Russia is articulating those. NATO, knowing this, violates that. And NATO, knowing this, is now trying to move into Ukraine. Zelensky and Putin met, earlier last month, talked about shit. They wanted to discuss what the relationship between Russia and Ukraine is going to be. There are hostilities there going back to 2014, but even that gets a little gray because there was a vote and a referendum in 2014 in Crimea where they voted to say we would like to be annexed by Russia. Well, NATO didn't like that, and they said, "Well, this one doesn't count. Why? Because we don't like what you have to say. Your sovereignty only depends on how we define your sovereignty, which is not sovereignty at all, right?" So Crimea they voted, and they on majority decided, yeah, we would like to be annexed by Russia. That has not happened. Um, do I agree with the way things were done in that region? With the current knowledge I have of that situation, I would say no, I don't agree with it. But I will say that there was a vote, and if NATO is not going to honor that vote, then they can't claim that they're a force for democracy, which they aren't. They're a military force that is specifically built to bring Russia to heel since at the end of World War II, when Stalin said he didn't want to be a capitalist state and he wanted to continue his socialist construction in Russia. So, what happened with the invasion? To be quite frank, I'm not sure. I am not a Putin expert. I don't follow personalities. Which is part of the problem in this situation is that it has become about personalities, and whenever it's convenient for liberals and conservatives, they like to take that personality, right, of someone such as Vladimir Putin, and then xenophobically apply it to the entire to anything that is Russian. Now since the invasion, you have people fucking throwing out vodka because it's a Russian export, right? Because only Russians make vodka. Nobody else has ever fucking made vodka before. So it's stupid. It's not smart. Again, I am against this. When I found out that Russia had invaded Ukraine, because we had spent I was watching all of the coverage of the situation, and I was looking at it, and I was going, okay, so they're talking with each other. America seems to be hyping up this war. They keep calling for this war. The State Department's like, they're gonna do it, and everybody's like, well, how do you know they're gonna do it? And they're like, because we're saying it. We're saying they're gonna do it. We're saying this, that, because that, yeah. And they're like, yeah, but what's the evidence that you have that they're saying they're gonna invade Ukraine? And they were like, but we're telling you that they are, and there's proof, and we're telling you there's proof, and that's proof enough that there's proof. And everybody's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Well, what they were talking about is the fact that there was a conversation between Russia and NATO, and Russia had said, the nation of Russia had said, hey, Ukraine's the red line. If you guys try to get Ukraine to join NATO, we're going to look at that as a military aggression and take military action in order to protect our borders. We're going to look at that as a defensive strategy. And what does NATO do? NATO goes and talks to Ukraine about joining NATO. Specifically, the one thing that they said that was the red line for war. This is not a justification for what Vladimir Putin did by invading Ukraine, which I am against. I have to keep fucking saying that because the last 3 days I've tried to make some nuanced arguments, and people keep saying that I'm for it's like, what are you talking? Anyway, I'm against the fucking invasion of Ukraine. I'm also against the idea that NATO pursued Ukraine to the degree that they pursued Ukraine, knowing full well, in the context of Russia, what that's going to mean. So when the State Department says we have evidence that they're going to invade Ukraine, what they basically, and then they aren't willing to provide evidence. Well, if they provided evidence, what they would what we would have seen is Russia saying we're going to look at that as military aggression and defend our borders because now NATO is a little too close to us. and I think we would have been like, well, then don't fucking go to Ukraine to try to convince him to join NATO. Let them be a sovereign state. Well, it turns out that Russia wanted to build a pipeline in Ukraine as well. And as the foremost authority on pipelines, America didn't particularly like that. So there was a need to stop that as well. So the invasion happens. People go nuts. Now, Ukraine had already been getting far more coverage in just this last month than Yemen has ever gotten in mainstream discourse. I've talked about Yemen a little bit. It's still a subject that I have not had the time to get into, but I've kept up with the numbers. I've kept up with some of the bigger stories that have come out from there. Um, but I am also a comedian. I also address a lot of other larger topics, and I'm not saying that Yemen's not. Again, I'm not making the argument that Yemen is less important than these other topics. I'm also just one person producing all this shit. I am not CNN. I am not a multi-billion-dollar news organization that claims to be the arbiter of truth. CNN is. And in 20 years, there's only been 20 minutes of coverage when it comes to Yemen, something like that. When it comes to Ukraine, it's been rather nonstop. And even before mainstream and corporate media very blatantly came out and made racist statements, which they did, a lot of us were saying, this is hypocritical. Because day two, the United States slapped sanctions on Russia, which let's cover sanctions real quick. Sanctions only affect the working class. The oligarchs of the world don't ever get affected by sanctions. They only affect the working class of that country. And if you are for saving the people of whatever country from a dictator that wants to ruin their lives, then why would you punish the people with economic sanctions? Well, because you need to show people that things like socialism don't work. And how do you show people that socialism don't work? By putting capitalist shackles on it. If socialism operated as freely as capitalism gets to, people might see that socialism is kind of better. It's a human-centric philosophy that, when applied to economics, leads to the vast improvement of a lot of people's lives. And it actually doesn't hinder progress, and it doesn't hinder technological advancement. In fact, it pursues it. It also brings ethics into the conversation to all of these other topics that we're discussing. Under socialism, there is very little warfare. If anything, it's defense militaries rather than these massive offensive militaries that we're building. So the sanctions go up. I'm against them. And one of the things myself and several other people pointed out is, well, if invading a sovereign country is grounds for sanctions, then why haven't we put sanctions on America for invading Iraq illegally, for what they did to Afghanistan for 20 years, what they're doing to Syria since 2014, what's been going on in Yemen? What about Palestine? Where are the sanctions on Israel for committing war crimes and creating an apartheid state for Palestine? What about the operations in Africa? Somalia is getting bombed. Eritrea is getting bombed. Ethiopia is getting bombed. What about blatantly lying and making a mockery of democracy in countries like Venezuela? What about the CIA coups that have been run in countries like Nicaragua, Bolivia, Honduras, Ecuador? All of these fucking nations. What about the blatant use of military force through a U.S. controlled dictator in countries like Cuba? What about the unfair treatment of Puerto Ricans? What about the state of Haiti and the Dominican Republic and the hand that U.S. imperialism has played in that? If you're going to say Russia invading Ukraine deserves sanctions, I've just listed off a bunch of fucking reasons that the United States should have sanctions on it. And if you disagree with me, then you're a hypocrite. What is the difference? The difference is, as corporate media journalists have pointed out, this is Ukraine. This isn't Europe. It's not some backwoods third world country. Oh, yeah? Iran was a secular socialist democracy. Afghanistan was a secular socialist democracy. Syria was a secular socialist democracy. Fucking Africa didn't get a chance to implement any of these ideas because it's always been colonized by fucking Europeans, white Europeans. I'm sorry if you're offended by this as a white person or as a white liberal, but guess what, man? That's racist. To claim that Ukraine gets more attention than any of these other things, and to claim that the invasion of a European country deems sanctions, while the invasion and continuous bombing and coups of brown countries is justifiable in some way, shape, or form, is hypocritical, and it makes you a racist. And it's racism that you have to accept. But what I've kind of seen and learned from interacting with people in regards to bringing up this kind of hypocrisy in the over coverage of Ukraine is, even when people agree with me, and this has happened on Twitter, and I've seen it happen on other people's feeds as well, even if you do agree with me that we are dealing with racism, this crisis has really shown the global scope of racism in the human condition. This is still different somehow. And if you bring up this level of hypocrisy, then somehow you are a Putin puppet, that you support Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And as I've stated several times, and I'm sure you guys are fucking sick of hearing it, I am not for the invasion of Ukraine by NATO or by Russia, because I don't half-ass being an anti-imperialist. I don't half-ass being anti-war. So I got pretty frustrated seeing all that. Here's some other pieces of information that corporate media isn't covering, that I don't see in the conversation um, that liberals are having, Democrats are having about this. The United States and the United Kingdom have joined forces and funded and armed Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Well, Krish, how do we know they're neo-Nazis? Because they say they are. And they have fucking swastikas on their helmets and carved into their heads. And again, this is a fact that likes to go ignored. The Nazis get defeated because of Russian soldiers. The Russians lost millions of lives just as much as the rest of Europe and America and African forces and even Indian people, on behalf of the British, lost their lives. Russians are part of that. Russians helped the Allied forces in World War II. What was their biggest crime? They didn't want to be a capitalist state after World War II. So here we are. The UK and the US is funding neo-Nazis. And I've seen some stories where they're saying, oh, no, only 25% of them are neo-Nazis. We have various different kinds of other philosophies. That's still too many Nazis, man. If I may make a bold statement, I think one Nazi is too many Nazis. And the U.S., again, this is how we know that none of this shit really matters to capitalist America, is they funded them. They have U.S. weapons. And, they're attacking ethnically Russian people. So that adds a layer of muck to all of this, because I mean, where are the liberals? Where are the Democrats condemning this action? And again, I don't know if you remember, but the Russians fought the Nazis. They kind of have a thing against the Nazis. They don't like them. And America and England is funding them. Kind of adds another point of aggression from the West, doesn't it? Then there's all of this sort of Hollywoodization of Zelensky, where I saw somebody saying Jeremy Renner should play Zelensky in the Ukraine movie. And it's like, yo, are you guys thinking about this as a fucking movie? Because this is a war. This is a war that could have been prevented 10 times over. Decade after decade, there could have been actions that could have been taken by the West, by the arbiters of peace to the United States, to prevent this very situation that we're in. And you guys are like, who's gonna play the fucking world leader that I have decided to fawn over this week? People are dying on all sides here. Ukrainians are fucking terrified. And you guys want Jeremy Renner? I don't think Jeremy Renner fucking gives a shit about playing Zelensky. I can't speak for Jeremy Renner, but if I was in that position, I would be like, fuck off. This is a war. I'm not here to fucking entertain you. But that's part of the American psychosis. We fawn over these personalities. We mythologize all these people. Lest we forget, this is what happened to Castro in the 60s as well, is that he got mythologized. And he got mythologized by the West. There's a lot more to say to that, and there will be a video that's coming out about it later. But that's the reality, is that we're now mythologizing this person. And we've mythologized Putin as well. And this isn't to say that, again, I don't like Putin. I don't like any politician. I'm not a fan of the dude. I don't like what he did in Ukraine. I have to keep saying this over and over again, because every time an argument is made that debunks a bunch of the shit that the liberals are saying, which a lot of this shit is basically saying there's no good guys in this war. There's never been a good guy in any war. People's lives are lost for political and economic gain. People's lives are lost over rich people needing to make money. By the way, I want to point this out too, is supporting Nazis isn't like, this is not the first time America has supported the Nazis. JD, was it Rockefeller? I think it was JD Rockefeller. So, American Standard Oil was sold to the Nazis. Prescott Bush laundered money for the Nazis during World War II. All of this was happening during World War II. Why? Because they needed to make money, and they didn't really give a shit who they were getting that money from. They don't have ethics or morality. And under capitalism, ethics and morality are seldom considered, if ever. Look, there's a lot of moving pieces in this Ukrainian crisis. It has shed light to a lot of problems in our society, particularly with how deep that racism runs, and how much, regardless of our acceptance, we are specifically white Americans are willing to do about it. and how much this really shows the liberal side of hypernationalism. And I know I'm not an expert in this, right? There's probably 30 pieces of information that needs to be learned in order for us to truly understand the situation. I might have 15. The people following corporate media and only corporate media have like 3, and 2 of them are likely lies. So my point is, it's important to learn this information from sources that are not funded by corporations, that don't have ad dollars to worry about. Breakthrough News, Lee Camp, Ben Norton from Multipolarista, Mint Press News, Abby Martin, Richard Medhurst. Trying to think of who else. Counterpunch has done a really good job of kind of breaking this down and explaining some stuff. Who else? I'm trying to think who else. Those are the ones that are coming to the top of my head right now. And these are very suppressed news sources. These are very, very suppressed news sources. In fact, RT is being censored. I believe pretty much all through Europe. RT's YouTube channel and Spotify has taken down RT's stuff. My friend Lee Camp had his podcast taken down because it's affiliated with RT from Spotify. I mean, Spotify is a piece of shit for many reasons, but this is just, more confirmation that they're a piece of shit. Here's the thing. The people that are on RT did not invade Ukraine. In fact, Lee has come out and made statements about how he doesn't agree with the invasion of Ukraine, much like I have 778 times in this fucking podcast. This is not an easy situation, but I can tell you that if people are not going to start learning outside of the confines of the US narrative, you are never going to know the truth. You will make half-hearted arguments and validate your own implicit racism, as most people are doing right now. The people that are going to be hurt by this are the entire working class of the globe. Your taxes are going to go up in the United States to support an ever-expanding fucking war budget. And I've done videos along with several people have done videos to talk about the military-industrial complex. Ukrainians are going to get affected by it. Average Ukrainians. Average Russians are going to get affected by this. They already are. There's sanctions being put on Russia right now. Who do you think it's affecting? Average fucking Russians. The working class of Russians, who, conveniently enough, I mean, I heard shit like, well, they need to be punished for electing Putin. Well, should Americans be punished for electing Trump? All of them? Because I'm pretty sure not all of them voted for fucking Putin. Should we all be punished for Bush? Should we all be punished for Obama's war crimes? I don't know about you, but I didn't invade Syria. I didn't make that call. I didn't make that decision. The ICC is going to get involved to investigate Ukraine. The ICC last year, finally, after decades, agreed to investigate Palestine, and Israel's pissed about it. If the ICC wants to prove that it is not a biased racist organization that is American backed, American controlled, I'm not sure how to phrase that, but basically tied with American interests, then it needs to investigate what's going on in Syria in regards to U.S. imperialism, what's going on in Yemen and in Africa and in Venezuela. Hey, open the investigations in Ukraine too. This is not me saying don't invest. I'm pointing out hypocrisy. You understand? Why aren't U.S. war crimes being investigated by the ICC? Great questions to be asked. And every time you ask them in our current discourse, you're called, 1,001 names. You can't criticize NATO in our current situation. You can't criticize America in our current discourse about Ukraine. Why? We're not innocent in this. America's not innocent in this. So what's the solution? I don't particularly have one. This is a very complex geopolitical situation that has very, very grave consequences. Um, if you're wondering what those consequences are, you should all watch Doctor Strangelove. China will likely take Russia's side because they don't want to take America's side in this situation. If America decides to pursue a military action against Russia, this will cascade into a world war. And that has zero positive impacts for anybody on this planet. 7 billion people that are going to be affected because people needed to have a dick measuring contest. So here's what I'm going to wrap this up here. Because I feel like I've said what I needed to say. Here's sort of my thought. I'm done. I'm kind of exhausted of engaging people on social media. I've always thought that social media could be a good tool for communication, but it is more a tool for echo chambers and being an asshole. There's probably a dog here in the background, but that's okay. But my point is, do your homework. If you are only looking at this from Russia's evil perspective, then you're missing like over 50% of the fucking story. If you look at it from all perspectives and realize that there are no good guys, stop looking for good guys in wars. There are none. There are zero fucking good guys in any fucking war. Stop looking for good guys. That's number two. If you really want the accurate truth of the situation, then you need to 100% stop looking for good guys in a war. There are none. The dog agrees with me. So those are two things I would say. I would also say start looking outside corporate media. Start looking outside corporate media. You can't get the truth from corporate media. They are backed by the people that are profiting off this war, which are giant fucking war profiteers. That's who's fucking gonna make buco bucks. And the fossil fuel industry. They all advertise on every single fucking corporate media, even NPR. NPR is funded by General Dynamics, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. These are all war profiteers. So of course they're gonna sit there and freak out and tell you that you need to go to war because they're gonna make fuck tons of money off of it. That's all I'm going to say about it. You need to look outside corporate media, look beyond the Russia is evil only narrative, and understand that you can be both against the United States, NATO, and Russia all at the same time. We're not going to solve anything if and realize that there is some racism that we need to address as a society. And again, if you want to get past that racism, yeah, you can keep your eye on what's going on in Ukraine because it's a very difficult situation. But if you really want to show that you're not racist, then look up what's going on in Palestine and talk about it with people. Look up what's going on in Yemen, talk about it with people. Somalia, Ethiopia, Venezuela, talk about it with people outside the perspective of corporate media. That's my advice. That's at least a way that we don't fall for the same bullshit propaganda that we fell for during the Cold War and during the Iraq invasion. I don't know if that'll actually fucking happen in our society. But I'm a dreamer. So I'm going to keep talking about this stuff through the nuanced perspective that I have, because that's what I think is important. I have no sides in this war other than the fact that I'm against war and I'm against imperialism, whether it comes in the form of Russia or the United States or Europe. So that's the perspective I'm coming at it from. And if you're going to ask me to pick a fucking side, go away. I don't have any. I see you as kind of a lost cause. We're not going to have discourse. We're going to have a debate, and you're going to try to win, and that solves nothing because all you're doing is a verbal version of warfare. Not interested in it. If you want to have a conversation, great. If you want to have a debate, fuck off. I know I'm not being polite about that, but I just see debates as another fucking use of capitalism. It's just an intellectual takeover of capitalism because it's all about points and somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. And then people like fucking Ben Shapiro are taken seriously because they know how to quote debate properly, which is just talking really fast and not listening to anybody else's opinion. And half the time when they talk really fast, they're not even really talking about the subject that they need to talk about. So, but yeah, that's some of my thoughts on this situation. Had to get those out. Next week we'll be back with some interviews. I've got some pretty great ones lined up. We are going to be talking more about Ukraine. We are going to be talking more about the media. Those are topics that are incredibly important to cover right now. We are also going to be talking about some other big topics as well. We're gonna have some fun creative guests on as well. So stay right here. Stay tuned in. Stay dialed in, folks. But with all that said and done, be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. Until next week, stay taboo, everybody. See you later.